Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Next Generation IT Service Management, Changing the Future of IT. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Dennis Drogseth, VP of Research at Enterprise Management Associates. Dennis brings over 30 years of experience in various aspects of marketing and business planning for service management solutions. And before I hand things over to Dennis, I wanted today's audience to know that you can log your questions anytime throughout the course of the presentation using the chat panel. If we are unable to get to your questions, I will go ahead and send those on to Dennis. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback as well as some additional resources. So I hope you will check that out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Dennis Drogseth. Dennis?
Thanks, Raleigh, and thank you all for listening in today and looking on today. First of all, I'd like to introduce our sponsors. The topic here is, of course, next generation IT service management. And I'm happy to say that in various ways, all the sponsors represented here embody that direction in different ways, and what that direction is and means we'll examine more closely during the webinar. You see BMC, Cherwell, EasyVista, Freshworks, HP Enterprise Software, Ivanti, and ServiceNow. A pretty solid list for next generation in the IT service management arena. So the good news and the bad news for everyone, including me, is I have a lot more here than I can possibly do details on in 45 minutes. We invite you to certainly look at the report, also invite you to follow on questions. And the goal, though, is to give you a lot of overview of what we looked at, what the data shows, some of the trends. And there's a lot of consistency, I would say, overall in what the message is. Which I hope I'll be able to hammer home. Very quickly, though, the agenda, demographics and budget, organization, governance, strategic priorities, and best practices, quite a handful right there. Then we'll be looking at some of the technology adoptions, analytics, and service modeling priorities, catalogs and app stores and endpoint management, cloud and agile and DevOps, and some surprises I think you'll see in the DevOps arena in particular. And then obstacles, what's the biggest obstacle today? It wasn't what it was 2 years ago, and success. So demographics and budget. We were going to try to do 250 respondents, but for various reasons, to hit all the data we wanted, we ended up with 264. It was supposed to be 60% and 40%. It is 62% and 38% between North America, England, Germany, and France. We did look at a banner between the geographies, and there was surprising commonality, actually, across both geographies. The one thing that was consistent, though, and with other research, is North America at least assigned greater degrees of success rates to themselves than the European countries. I think that's a combination of certain advantages in deployments and technology adoption, and also just sort of cultural difference in terms of level of skepticism, if you like. We had a very strong executive presence, and we did not set quotas to make this happen. It just occurred. We had 41% director or above, unusually high. And I'll say one of the reasons, one of the things I think this reinforces, which is a theme to this research, is that IT service management is becoming increasingly a kind of a hub, a center of IT overall, and increasingly valued by more and more executives from the top down. We also, by the way, had about 14% who were line of business, digital marketing, et cetera, who could provide a commentary from that perspective. Our lead verticals, as you see, high-tech software, finance and banking, and insurance, and then retail. We did look at those. I'd say the most interesting couple of tidbits there in the retail area, they were more likely to put enterprise services and especially sales and customer-facing services in their ITSM catalogs and a little more likely to be involved with Internet of Things in terms of components in stores and in other areas. And the average budget was $30 million for the IT. And you'll see more on size here. We got a nice balance between small and medium and large. We did not want to look at mom and pop, so we did not include any groups below 250 employees. We also looked at size, and large. Pretty predictably, the main interests were large companies and how they stood out, and they were consistently more likely to have more service desks. They were more likely to have CMDBs, along with the mid-tier, I should say. More likely to have more sources for IT services in their catalogs. More likely to see more impacts from cloud and ITSM. Probably the most interesting, more likely to update applications multiple times a day. And that percentages, if you look between large, medium, and small, 34% of the large companies updated their applications multiple times a day, 19% mid-tier and 17% small, and more likely to support enterprise workflows and Internet of Things. So, all right, let's look at organization and governance and strategic priorities. We looked at who was central IT and who was line of business, and we did some analysis there. Most turned out to be central IT, and generally they were a little more progressed. They had higher executive presence in terms of IT, pretty much what you'd expect. I think this is the first on the next bullet there. We had, did you have single or multiple service desks? We actually had a precise 50-50 split in our respondents there. And we looked at areas of involvement. And now I'm going to mention a theme around this because the average respondent had 4 areas of involvement, excuse me, and that in part reflects some of that executive role, but it also reflects an image I came across as I was been doing consulting on this data, and I kind of resisted it, but I'm going to stick with it. And that is, I've talked about hub of IT for IT service management. I started to think more and more of an octopus with many legs. Well, of course, I've seen a lot of James Bond movies, and those symbolism for the octopus isn't really so great. So I looked it up in Google and did some research on sort of traditional values. And the octopus overall symbolizes complexity, diversity, mystery, vision, intelligence, variability, and insight. And if you take those attributes and you put it in that hub idea, I think you see a lot of association for what's going on here. So look at these areas of involvement. So IT asset management, including software asset management, that actually was 14% of a prime area of involvement. Service desk, help desk, incident and request, core idea, that was at 10%, and it was tied with integrated cross-silo support for problem, incident, availability, and performance, which are very related, also at 10%, and integrated cross-silo support for IT governance and analytics and OpEx efficiencies, all tied at 10%. The governance theme was another one that's continually getting hammered through in this data. Just below that, we saw things like support for managing change, support for portfolio planning, another growth area for ITSM as data comes in to help shape real use and real insight into applications. Support for Internet of Things. Fascinating to see how that's a growing area as well. Cross-silo support for security, fraud, and risk. Another area of a lot of growth. And next week we'll be doing jointly with Dave Monahan a webinar on our security and operations research. And integrated cross-silo support for DevOps, another high growth area. So you can see the high-level executive support spectacularly outlined here in terms of how people assign themselves. We did a kind of examination on different roles. With the 30% executive, we grouped the ITSM together as 24%, 15% operations, 12% asset and financial management. We had others that were cross-domain and more business-oriented roles. And one thing that should become clear, we were not targeting only service desk professionals, level 1, level 2, what have you. They were certainly a part of the research, but we were much more interested in looking at this from a overall IT perspective. The requirement was you had to be actively involved, either in a managerial or hands-on role, in an ITSM-centered initiative. That was the requirement to participate, and we tried to find some blatant and devious ways to eliminate anyone who was not. So that also shapes some of the results. We probably get rather different results if we limited it to only sort of level 1, level 2 non-management ITSM professionals. So we also did banners, and this was one of the more interesting ones. I'll just share a few highlights on different role perceptions and values in looking at these. Executive Suite, ITSM, Operations, IT Financial Management, and then other, which is that mix of business architecture, whatever. Strikingly, each group viewed ITSM as a central point for monitoring and capturing governance and operational efficiencies across all of IT, not just ITSM. That's a few exclamation points for me, and we'll see more of that later. Greatest roadblock for all groups, and this is another bit of exclamation point. Software deployment, administrative complexity is #1 issue. When I contrasted that from a little over 2 years ago, research we did in a similar vein, that was way down the list. Right at the top was politics and process and other issues. And I'll revisit that near the end when we look at success rates and challenges. But this said, I had to think about what that really meant. I think it really means next generation ITSM is underway, but we need software folks to make it really work. That's an opportunity for all you vendors out there. What were the top strategic priorities? It's kind of a sandwich between the Executive Suite and that other, which is cross-domain and business. They had similar views of really supporting end user support more fluidly with mobility, intelligent bots, self-service, et cetera. The bottom had more business workflow as well. IT Financial Management, pretty interested in issues to do with fraud, risk, and compliance. ITSM, the core of in fact, overall, #1 strategic was improving user experience. And operations was improve operations to service desk integrations for instant problem availability, not surprisingly, but also tied with cross-silo support for portfolio planning and optimization. Why was that? Because relevance and value also helps to speed efficiencies, and I think operations gets tired of being dragged every nook and corner without a sense of relevance and value. Who governs or overall is the management chain for the ITSM team? And nothing too surprising in this slide. Operations overall, just by a few percentage points ahead. Executive Suite, followed by IT Asset Management. Cloud was interesting up there, but only 7% saw the lead on the service desk or help desk side by itself. This was also a significant point. 56% of the ITSM teams are slated for growth. And what's interesting is 2 years ago, that number was 50%. Okay, so it's not a huge difference, but it's definitely progress. 7% will be downsized, 36% stay the same. 2 years ago, 15% were downsizing ITSM teams. So that the notion that ITSM is a growing opportunity, that octopus that's reaching out with many legs and arms to support many things in IT seems to be reinforced. Top reasons for growth. These are telling. Companies growing, so are we. Okay, so that's pretty obvious. We had you had to pick, the only one vote, and that got 14%. The next two items were tied. More actively engaging in operations for availability performance, and then cloud is requiring increasing investment in ITSM. That was tied at 12%. And then providing greater direction for really underscoring this is really that life cycle of ITAM and SAM, IT Asset Management, Software Asset Management, where change and value and come together with traditional asset management values, and then assuming more responsibility across all the lines of business for various things like process, workflows, and support for Internet of Things. Some of the other areas were interesting, increasingly viewed as the center of IT governance. Even ITIL figured we're expanding our outreach to support ITIL. That got 8% of the votes. And Agile and DevOps featured into it, and security and operations also featured into it. The big question of reaching out beyond just IT to support customer and other values. So here the question is, IT help desk, service desk environments, and non-IT customer service, are they being brought together? This is a growing trend as well. As you see, the percentage is 83% when you look when you combine the blue and the green there. A little over 2 years ago, that was 72%. So this is again a growing trend, and a smart one because it combines expertise and technology that can be applied in both areas. So this slide has a lot on it, and I'll do my best to do it a quick justice for you. When we looked at top team integrations, and this again, it's a little bit like strategic initiatives, but who do you want to play with most importantly in the last 2 years? What became most important? Integration with business stakeholders, integration with operations stakeholders. So business, and they're very close. Business was 42%, operations 41%. They had to pick overall where they were going. DevOps teams picked 40%, picked DevOps teams, and cloud-specific teams were 38%. So there's not a big delta there. ITAM-SAM was 36%. So all those are pretty closely aligned, 6 percentage points between top and bottom there. On the other hand, when you look at who's leading in governing IT process and OpEx efficiencies, pretty big difference. ITSM team, that was 78%, saw that as a lead. Executive Suite was 41% and operations 38% underneath that. And a cross-domain service management team, 22%. And again, obviously you could vote for multiple. You could pick who was really involved. But ITSM clearly came out on top. When we looked at top process, what were they actually measuring? Mean time to resolve incidents came in at the top at 42%, customer satisfaction 39%, success rates in managing change at 38%, and right along with sort of the war room view, first call resolution 36%, mean time to repair service issues or reduced war room time was 35%. Some of the interesting other governance votes were self-inflicted outages due to managing change. That came in at 23%. OpEx efficiencies in delivering software audits. That came in at 21%. OpEx efficiencies in delivering new applications, really DevOps-centric. That came in at 18%. And OpEx efficiencies in managing vendors in support of that extended enterprise and their efficiencies at 15%. And the answer wasn't, again, aspiration. It was, what are you currently doing? So top 10 strategic priorities, which kind of follow on these, and maybe not such a surprise for you. Improve end-user experience internal to the business. That's naturally the top one. The next two were actually tied. Integrated security for integrated support for security, that growth in SecOps, that was a little bit of a surprise to be so high. It was tied with transforming end-user support. Then ITAM came in next. Core service and help desk operations with incident and request management came in next. So let's just take a breath on that. 1, 2, and 3 are part of the arms reaching out from our enlightened octopus, if you'd like. 4 is centered right in the notion of the octopus itself. So what that's telling me is strategic priorities are very much in outreach mode, not just in doing what was traditional. And of course, 5 reflects a little bit of both: improve operations to service desk integrations for incident problem availability. That is both outreach and core. When we go down to 6 here, right after, in the same flavor, operations integrations for change and config. But look what's right next: Internet of Things, and actually tied with that. The support move to internal and external cloud. That's an ongoing theme. Just about all research is a challenge. And then integrated support for governance actually seems lower than other data would suggest, but still very important. And portfolio planning. So again, look at this list. Think of that octopus with many legs and responsibilities growing in IT in playing an increasingly important role. So I'll only spend a moment on this. Number one is best practices are kind of all over the board. Management of portfolio led, although when we actually did an accounting of who voted for ITIL version 2 versus version 1, it came out to be the same percent, 31%. So that would have been tied. However, we did see a bit of a decline in ITIL with 2 years ago. So you saw 18% and 20 here. 2 years ago, it was 20% and 32% with the same question. So a bit of little bit of a decline for ITIL there. Technology, analytic, and service modeling priorities. So we group these in several ways: basic technology or functional priorities. We looked at social IT, which was actually quite striking. That's on the rise, not just with ITSM, but in general. Project management, also on the rise. Then software asset management, mobile, and enhanced capabilities for IT asset management. But you look at the top 2, they're also about that role of coordination, bringing IT together, helping IT to communicate better. As an anecdote in our SecOps research, I'm spilling the beans on one little point. When we looked at different groups, including security, operations, ITSM, and other teams, who is most successful in driving SecOps initiatives? ITSM. And maybe that reason is that octopus evolving with multiple legs into IT. Top 5 priorities for automation, workflow within and across IT. That led by quite strikingly, 27% voted for that. The next was job scheduling at 15%, so a big difference there. And then everything was close. Automation in support of infrastructure, inventory and discovery, a basic need for everything really, and service request management and security-related automation. So we went down the list and pretty closely ranked for things like runbook and analytics-driven automation as well. So if you can commit this to memory in the next 3 seconds, then you get a special award. I know Raleigh has saved the be a test at the end. No, the story here is there's a lot in the report to take in, and the other story here is analytics is a growing area and a growing requirement for ITSM. It's not just operation-centric. I've never liked the term IT operations analytics. Even though there are a number of analytics that are operation-centric, many of them embrace all of IT. But look what's at the top here, analytics for IT governance in terms of efficiencies and effectiveness. And this, again, is at one of those exclamation points. Our octopus is helping to manage the efficiencies and effectiveness of all of IT. Then analytics for change management, analytics in supporting optimizing IT infrastructure. You get a theme here, reaching out well beyond just the service desk. And, of course, insight into user experience and end-user problems. So there's security towards the middle. There's a 21%, you'll see analytics for dealing with multiple data sources, which is a challenge everywhere. And analytics near the bottom for supporting cloud costs and resources, a challenge everywhere. Moving into the business side now, we have a section in the report focused on beyond IT into the business. And we looked at management priorities there, executive dashboards right at the top, not surprisingly, and workflow automation, linking IT and business stakeholders. So that combination of visibility and workflow, constant theme in bringing people together. Social media, part of that story as well. In this case, though, for customer satisfaction assessments. Fourth is very interesting because it reflects how much we're dependent on partner-related and sometimes cloud service provider-related business process optimization. So that is another outreach beyond even IT in the traditional sense. And then support for managing enterprise assets, Internet of Things. Going to a huge area of growth, and I'm going to only touch on it briefly here. When we looked at workflows that were created through the ITSM team for the enterprise, this is the rankings we got. Utilities and power, interestingly enough, kind of flowing into that, almost related to Internet of Things by a handshake. Human resources, building and facilities, transportation, vehicle management, manufacturing, both tied, and then, of course, any number of very vertically specific, my first exposure to Internet of Things was agricultural because the guy who created SNMP, or one of the people who created them, Jeff Case, had put nibs on all his cows on a farm in Tennessee, so he could track them, and that was back in 1999, I think. Here we're looking at what's going on with Internet of Things, and you can see 65% are already supporting Internet of Things initiatives in some ways. But when we wanted to understand what that meant, we got actually, between top and bottom of what I'm about to share with you is 6 percentage points that are all closely linked. Integrated change management for Internet of Things, for non-IT specific components. Lifecycle asset management for Internet of Things. That's one, just a few percentage points below. Integrated support for improved security and compliance. Process automation and workflow in support of IT governance for Internet of Things, governance coming back. And integrated incident and problem management for Internet of Things. So all that was sort of the ranked order, but the top got 44% and the bottom 36%. So what's happening with the CMDB? Well, one thing we did see that was a little bit sad to me, because I'm a believer in the evolution of the CMS and CMDB, was that it had fallen a little bit in terms of priority from 2 years ago. But nonetheless, 51% did have CMDBs or CMS that were working and deployed. 69% had federated data, already federated data. 25% were looking to do it, as you can see. And all that correlated with success. Average weekly time spent reconciling data was about 12 hours. And this is consistent with other research we do, the more time spent actually correlates with more success, which is sad to say. It means that there's a lot of work to be done to make that better. But the need for good analytics and good processes in optimizing and reconciling data from different sources hasn't gone away. Most dominant use case were asset and change, but in terms of what was most prevalent, we saw data center migration and financial optimization. And CMDB was still very much correlated with overall success with ITSM. There you see at the bottom, I apologize if there's a little overlap with the screen, 25% had application discovery and dependency mapping, and the dominant use case there was not surprisingly performance and availability, but change management followed right afterwards. Okay, this is another one, if you can commit it to memory in 2 minutes or whatever, trip to Vegas, I'm sure. So the main point here, number one, a lot of different data sources. And the average, when we just tallied them, and I'm sure the reality is even higher, 4.5 per respondent. What struck me as a little bit surprising, again on the governance exclamation point, that was the number one source of data. That was not true in the past, and it's a rising role for the ITSM group, followed by asset management database, a data store integrated with ITSM, and then you start to see on fourth CMDB right there. If you jump down toward the middle, and 20% of federated CMS, application discovery and dependency mapping, which became even more important with cloud, is another source. Spreadsheet data right above a federated CMS. The spreadsheet data was even more important in the past. Excuse me. Down on 18% social media, operational sources at 17%, user experience data at 16%, and performance and transactions also at 16%. So you get a kind of operational data coming in as also important right in the middle. Moving on to service catalogs and app stores and endpoint management. This has a really simple message, which is that this is on the rise again. This is higher than it was several years ago. And 60% here actually have multiple catalogs or app stores if you add up all the numbers and colors, including the 9% there in blue. Only 1% had none, and that's definitely forward progress. So looking at what we're doing with some of the highlights around service catalogs, 75%, and this is also very linked to success, currently have cost and usage insights. 21% will be doing so in the near future. And this is very strongly linked with success. Once you can model cost and usage, you're starting to also model service consumption that actually links into portfolio planning and operational efficiency. When we looked at what was in the catalog from an IT perspective, the top were professional services for IT, interestingly enough, primarily, and project management, and user device provisioning and end user support, help and incident management. Excuse me. Chief enterprise groups, though, were operations at 43%, sales at 34%, human resources at 33%, facilities management at 31%. We actually had marketing following that at 40%. At 30%. And actually, only 4% had no enterprise content. Only 4%. 2 years ago, striking difference, that was 24% that had no enterprise content in their service catalog. So once again, the message here is diversity in terms of end device, and mobile clearly is a big part of that. And that's consistent with a lot of data we've seen, although the bars may change. The main message is it's not just about tethered endpoints anymore. What were the top 5 requirements for managing these environments? Security, software usage, software distribution, operating system deployment, and license management. Pretty consistent with what we've seen over the years. 86% were using mobile to support IT as service management and IT professionals, and 87% were supporting consumers. Some of the values, by the way, just the top 3 in having mobile support for ITSM and IT professionals, increased IT efficiencies and reduced operational expense, improved IT service management to development interactions, we're going to get there pretty quickly, and improved responsiveness to IT service management consumers, all because of mobile access. Looking at cloud and DevOps now. cloud and virtualization, what's happening here. Cloud is not an easy endpoint. Cloud is not an easy place to go. It's not a spa with a bar. Just the journey to the cloud, again, one of my ongoing comments, it's not a journey to the cloud, it's a journey with the cloud to optimize cloud to make it happen and work for you. And so there are a lot of challenges associated with cloud. Cloud and virtualization has made asset management more challenging, shortening review cycle for change, changing the approach to release management because of a lot of the DevOps things that we were able to look at. Just a few highlights we'll see here. Changing how we're organized because cloud is cross-domain in multiple ways, requiring higher levels of automation, provisioning services, pushing security and operations together, and security is a big issue with cloud, as you know. And the seventh item here was a resource for reducing costs associated with IT service management and IT. DevOps is the next story here, and I want to just put a big exclamation point here as well. 89% have integrated release management for application services with IT service management. Okay, think about that. How often do you hear ITSM talked about in DevOps context? 89% have some level of involvement with IT service management. And 2 years ago, it was still on the rise, but the number was 65%. So that's a pretty big jump. So what does that really mean when we look at that? What were they doing? 36% had common workflows of development as they moved into production. 34% were scheduling through their ITSM platform. 33% had active feedback loops, and feedback was a key priority. What's relevant, what's useful, and ITSM can be of value there. Then they participated in overlay teams, actively provisioned production environments with our CMDB CMS. That was 30%. We leveraged configuration automation pre-production, and that was 29%. And I realize I just covered that first bit of information in the top of that slide there. Workflows, scheduling, feedback loops, and feedback requirements. Interestingly enough, if we go down to the second bullet, major bullet, 71% have a fast track for applications, and they deal with them often with different tools, by the way. We had huge positives when we looked at integration between DevOps and ITSM. 36% thought it was transformative and 44% very positive. Those are great ratings. Obstacles and success, and we'll be wrapped up. This is pretty striking because 27% say, you know what, we need better solutions. We have all these other issues. Look at the organizational, political is 14%, dialogue 14%, all tied down there. Processes all tied down there. But 27% want better solutions and better software. And 2 years ago, 30% thought the major issue was organizational and political issues, and around that 14% was software. So I mentioned that already. The message to me is that next generation IT service management is becoming a reality. It's becoming more accepted. The cultural barriers are less. But now that that octopus with all of its tentacles is reaching out across multiple oceans at once, golly gee, we need better software than we've got to really make it work. So that's a big opportunity as well as a challenge. So when we looked at success rates, this year we also had a group that felt they were more successful than 2 years ago. In 2015, 16% thought they were extremely successful. 36% thought they were very successful. This year, very fresh data, by the way, because it just came in, really. 33% felt they were very successful and 43% very successful. 33% extremely successful, 43% very. Well, what was the formula? A very high-level set of bits on this. Bringing cloud services into a common portal was one attribute for high success. when we examined those who were extremely successful against the other groups. Mobile access for ITSM professionals, offering consumers mobile access as well, continuous application release updates, doing that more frequently, more challenging, but also more empowering in terms of what's needed. Establishing a fast track for release management, that's a bit of a head scratcher, but it again reflects that faster track in general. Effective ITSM support for DevOps, and again, I underscore that 4 times, and support for Internet of Things. We also saw very strong correlations with IT budget growth overall and ITSM team growth. Larger versus smaller enterprises tended to be more successful. Executive suite leadership helped promote success. Mature consolidation of ITSM with customer service helped promote success. And actually viewing ITIL as more important was also linked to success for those of you skeptics out there, although there are adjustments to be made, no doubt. And success in CMDB deployments was correlated, and supporting costs and usage insights and service catalog. Well, these are just a few of the nuggets. There's more in the report in our library, and I think we have a few minutes left for questions. Raleigh, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. If you have any questions, you can log them in the chat panel. Like I said, if we can't get to them right now, I will go ahead and send those to Dennis. Dennis, the first question is, would cybersecurity infrastructure be included as a part of IT infrastructure or a separate one?
We didn't. So in our SecOps research, we had a little more granularity. So when we looked at IT infrastructure overall, we didn't separate them out, but there were a number of areas where we did separate out security requirements, and they scored very high. So that's the best answer I can give. We did not have a separate question saying cybersecurity infrastructure per se.
Okay, thank you. Also, the next question is, what costs can be defined when implementing CMDB properly?
What costs can be defined?
Yes.
In terms like dollars and cents costs? So
yes, that's how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, okay. So we just happen to have a book that we wrote on how to succeed with CMDB systems in the age of cloud and agile. I would say the costs associated with CMDB and CMS are much more process-oriented and OpEx-oriented than they are software-oriented. On the other hand, I'll say there's a huge evolution in the technology surrounding service modeling in support of cloud environments, dynamic environments, VM motion, et cetera. So that there are 2 parallel discussions. My biggest, if I had to pick one bit of advice, and I'm not sure how you put cost to this except for OpEx costs, is please do not build a CMDB by thinking the right answer is to put all the data in the world into one place, and then once you get it there, trying to figure out what to do with it. The way to do that, the way to succeed, is to use relevance and value and priorities on what you need to do first, second, and third, and build a system, what we call a system of relevance, based on the relevant data that you need, build from there. That's a bit of a digression, but what I've seen from so many deployments.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. That brings us to our webinar time for today. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA. It will include, for those of you who are interested in learning more about the report, there will be a link to that, an on-demand webinar playback, and also I will include the link to the webinar that Dennis and our research director, David Monahan, will be hosting next week as well, if you are interested in that. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.